Hello. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about how to decorate your ggplot2 graph and how to control its aesthetic characteristics. So we're going to be tackling those last couple pieces of the grammar of graphics here. So first thing I want to talk about is the aesthetic characteristics themselves. So we've talked a number of times about how we can set certain aesthetic characteristics to vary by the data, right? We're basically setting axes here. So we're allowing things to vary by size or by shape or by color, or by X or by Y. And we know how to do that, right? We just take the axis that we're varying on, of which there are many, many options. And if you look, by the way, in the help file for a geometry, it will usually tell you the aesthetics that it accepts, the full list. And we set that equal to a variable, and then whatever different values of the variable there are then different values of that aesthetic characteristic. Something else, though, is that if we take that aesthetic characteristic out of the aesthetic function and move it into the geometry function, instead of setting things separately by data, it will set it for the entire geometry. So here we have moved the shape variable, or we've moved the shape axis out of the aesthetic variable, so it's no longer an axis, and we just set it equal to 10. So now we get shape equals 10 for every single data point. So it is applied to everything, not just to, not separately by data. And so we can change the aesthetic characteristic of a geometry as a whole in this way. So that's the first thing we can do. And we can apply this generally. So like, let's say, for example, this bar geometry. I've set not just the color. So the color here applies to the outline and not the fill. So the fill is still being set by how many cylinders we have by factor sil there. You can see inside the aesthetic function. But the line type for everything is being set to dashed. It's a dashed line. And the color is being set to black for everything. So the outline is a black dashed line everywhere for this particular bar graph. The second thing we can think about is change the coordinate system. So we can change the coordinates in order to change the presentation of our graph. So for example, let's take this lollipop graph. The lollipop geometry comes from the ggalt package, which we have here. And so we have the number of automatic and manual cars in this cars data set. And so what we can do if we want to, instead from having this go down to up, which makes us, we have a lot of space there for automatic and manual. I want it to instead go left to right. So I've added chord flip here, which will flip the X and Y axes so that the X axis is over here and the Y axis is down here at the bottom, which makes this, in my opinion, a little bit easier to read. I've also set the color of this to red, and I've made it bigger with the size aesthetic, both of which are outside the aesthetic function, so they apply to everything in that geometry. So we can flip the coordinates. We can also use chord fixed, which makes sure that the X and Y have the exact same ratio. It's a fixed ratio. And that's what we can do. So the next thing we can think about is how we can control all of the elements of the presentation. And it turns out every single element in a ggplot2 graph is controllable with the theme function. So theme is an incredibly flexible function that allows you to change pretty much everything in the graph. And also, as a bonus, you can save your theme function as an object. If instead of adding it to a graph, you do your theme function and then you save it as an object, then you just do add plus your object and it will retheme all of your graph in the exact same way. So what does the theme option do? The theme function do? Well, inside of it, it has as arguments every single thing that you can change about a ggplot. So the type of text that you have on the x-axis. So here we have axis.text.x, and we're going to set that equal to element underscore text. We're going to set the size of that font. We're going to set the family of that font. We're going to make it a serif font. Here we've set the axis text y. We're going to angle it as well, right? What's this element thing? So that's element text. So each part of the theme we set with we can set with elements. So there's text elements, there's rectangular elements, there's shape elements. There's lots of different kinds of elements that we can set. And generally it works sort of as you'd expect, right? We have a text object here. We're going to set it to an element text. And we can change the size, we can change the family, and whatever we don't specify, we'll just go back to the default. So we're setting the axis text to be size 12 and size 16 respectively here. So we can see we have that angle of 10 degrees that we had. We made the text bigger here. We've made the text bigger here as well. Also, by the way, I've specified on my scale function, remember those scale functions, one of the things you can specify there is where the axis ticks are. So here I'm setting the breaks option to only show the break at 10 and at 20. So instead of what it was before, which was 0, 5, 10, and 15. I wanted to instead just show 10 and 20 and nothing else. So I have full control of the text elements there. I also have control of where the axes break. But theme goes a lot further than that. I can start adjusting other things with theme. So for here, I've got the axis line, the line that goes on the x-axis and the y-axis. I'm going to set that with element line color equals red. Most things, by the way, can be set separately for x or y or together. So here I'm setting both axis lines by doing axis.line, but I could do axis.line.x to only set the x-axis, or axis.line.y to only set the y-axis. And here I've got element line. Like I said, it's a line, so it's a line element. I'm setting it to a red color, and I'm setting the axis ticks. So that's just the little ticks that go beneath the axis to the number that it's labeled as. Of course, you can adjust that. You can adjust everything. And I'm setting the size of that to be really big, to be 5. So it's going to look kind of crazy, but here it is, right? We have those 5 width ticks that are now wider than they are tall, going to the 10 and the 20. I've also put that red axis line. So I would really recommend, you can get wild with this. You can change everything you want. Here I've set the background panel to be a blue, have blue lines with a yellow fill. And the panel grids are going to be green, and I've taken the major grids, I made them blank. Element blank is the way that you get rid of things in theme. And so this is going to look kind of wild, but we can do that. I would really recommend, if you're interested in changing the theme, to look at the help file for the theme function, because it's got like 80 different arguments that you can change. And most of them you can look at the name of it and know immediately what it's going to change. And it's pretty easy to figure out how you can change it. And as I mentioned, once you set up your elaborate little theme function, you can save it as an object and just add it to your graph so you can get a consistent theming every time. Speaking of consistent theming, there are also, of course, some pre-packaged themes in ggplot2 that you can use. So here's the default theme. It's got that sort of gray background. It's got the axis grids. My favorite is probably minimal, theme_minimal, which, by the way, is just a saved version of a theme function, right? Someone typed out a theme function and saved it as theme minimal. There you go. Now you can add it to your graph. And so this one takes out the gray in the back. It's still got those grid lines. Sometimes I'll adjust the theme function to take out these grid lines if I feel like it. But it's a lot simpler. Another really good one is Tufty. So this is in the GG themes package. It's very similar to minimal, except it's even more minimal. It takes out those grid lines in the back. It even takes out the axis lines. So it's a very minimal graph that I happen to like. There are, of course, many, many themes out there. If you search for ggplot2 themes, there are a number of packages that just do that. And so you can look around and see if there's anything that you like. Although for me, I like these really minimal ones. So like, how many different ways are there really to do that anyway? Okay, that's the basics of decorating your ggplot2 graph. We talked about how we can use the theme function to really change any sort of presentation element that we like. We also talked about changing the aesthetic characteristics by taking them out of the aesthetic function so that we can change the entire aesthetic of the geometry by setting things like fill, line type, color, everything like that. And that's basically it. Those two tools, along with the scale functions that we talked about before, will allow you to control pretty much everything that you can imagine controlling about your ggplot2 graph. And this level of complexity and customization, despite a relatively simple interface for what you get, is one of the reasons why ggplot2 is such a standard and such a well-known and used package. All right, that's it. Thank you.